Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Developing a Proper Worldview. This is going to be episode 33. So, being that we're so far into this, if you're watching this video, you're very familiar with our process and what we're trying to accomplish here. So I'm not going to spend too much time going back over everything, but I would just put out this little reminder here. If you just happen to be catching this video randomly, make sure you go back and watch them in order. There is a purpose to the order. These are meant to be watched in sequential order, so just make sure you do that. But we just finished up the documentary Unlocking the Mysteries of Life, where we looked at several amazing things about microscopic life and the theory of irreducible complexity and how it disproves Darwinian evolution, natural selection evolution theory, that the processes and the details of life, even on a cellular level, on a tiny microscopic level, is so complex, so detailed, so organized, so thorough, that it cannot have been done in a step-by-step evolutionary process. It clearly points to intelligent design. On a cellular level, there's things going on that are machine-like, clockwork-like, very detailed. We looked at the bacteria flagellum. We looked at DNA, which is actually a blueprint for all of life. That includes detailed instructions on manipulation of amino acids into proteins and how proteins come together to form cells. And it's so complex that we learned that just 1 tablespoon of DNA, the instructions included in that, would fill books that you could stack to the moon like 7 times and back. It's just incredible the amount of information that is on a nano microscopic scale. Shows an intelligence, wisdom, and a creativity and knowledge that is far, far beyond anything we could ever imagine or comprehend. We clearly have a designer, a creator that made everything, that created the instructions for life in the very cells. It's incredible. It's overwhelming evidence for a creator, and it just destroys natural selection, evolutionary Darwinian theory. Those types of things, the evolutionary theory simply could not have happened. It is impossible, and that's just on a microscopic level. The Lord has created everything from the infinitesimally small to the enormous, mind-boggling universe. He has made all things, and they're beautiful, and they're designed, and they're purposeful. They show a wisdom and an intellect, like I say, that goes beyond anything we can comprehend. So it was a very awe-inspiring documentary. And during that documentary, they do or one of the interviewees is a guy named Jonathan Wells, I believe, who wrote a book called Icons of Evolution. And so that's what we're going to delve into now. There's a documentary. I think it's a book. It's not just this documentary, but this documentary would then be based on the premises outlined in that book. And I can't exactly remember what we're going to look at here, but I always, in my head, combine this documentary with the previous one. So they must be similar. They must be equally awe-inspiring to have made an impact like that in my memory. So it should be fun, and we're just starting. So I guess without further ado, let's jump into it and see what Icons of Evolution has to offer us. Alright, so we're jumping right into it here. They start with a quote from Richard Dawkins, who says, "If you meet somebody who claims not to believe in evolution, that person is ignorant, stupid, or insane, or wicked, but I'd rather not consider that." one has to wonder if this foolish man knows the irony of his statement, if he's purposefully making a statement that applies to himself. But it's just a pretty ridiculous statement. People like Richard Dawkins, they're well educated, they have intellect in an academic sense, but the Bible says the fool has said in his heart there is no God. So this man is a fool, and the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom and the beginning of knowledge. So people like Richard Dawkins don't even have the beginning of true wisdom and true knowledge. They're foolish people, and deceptive people.
I think American schools teach too little about evolution. A lot of the information regarding evolution is taught uncritically.
Which is propaganda.
I don't think this is good science education for the students in that district, and apparently neither did his colleagues nor his superintendent.
Our job is to teach the adopted curriculum, and that's what we follow.
The controversy is about whether a science teacher can actually give students evidence that's critical of Darwin's theory of evolution.
We want them to learn a religiously inspired critique of science based on faulty interpretations and non-existent facts.
That separation of church and state could crumble under mounting pressure from
I
those
could not verbally share any of this information with my students.
The role of a high school teacher is not to be on the cutting edge of research.
I have never seen such intolerance in a political issue.
The icons of evolution, these are examples of textbook evidences that actually distort the scientific evidence.
The controversy in modern times is not between science and religion, it's between two different interpretations of the same scientific evidence.
Scientists are supposed to question things. Scientists are supposed to be open to new evidence.
And I'm a scientist. I don't know any evidence against evolution.
That's okay for a PBS special, but that's not the real world. That's not what's taking place.
They won't allow a debate to go on. They try to stop it. The reason they try to stop it is they don't think they can win it.
Somebody comment on the volume. When I watch these back, I feel like there's an echo, or maybe the volume's too loud or too quiet. I don't know. Let me know how the volume is on these.
Burlington, Washington. A quiet, peaceful community about an hour north of Seattle. An unlikely setting for a battleground, but that's exactly what it has become. On a recent night, hundreds of parents, teachers, and students gathered at the local high school because of biology teacher Roger DeHart.
Already I'm being chastised or criticized that somehow my students can't understand.
For 15 years, DeHart has been a popular teacher at Burlington High School. Now, he's under fire for his teaching of evolution.
Based on Darwinian evolution, or based on evolution, we would say that which ones would be the fittest? I think it's very important for students to understand evolution. I think it's important that I teach students evolution and that they understand it so that they'll be successful in universities if they choose to go on. Well, I love biology. The thing that intrigues me was just the different habitats and ecosystems and things like that. I was intrigued by that. I love being out there, and so I had a real love for biology. The more I learn about the complexity of life, genetics, and the human genome, and the idea of this information in the cell, I think it's fascinating. What is the mechanism?
But DeHart's passion for biology is tempered by frustration. Frustration that students aren't learning enough about evolution. According to DeHart, teachers and textbooks are not presenting an accurate representation of evolutionary theory.
Either some of the current leading research is being left out, so it's dated, or else it's just plain misrepresented.
Because of his desire for students to learn accurate science, DeHart decided to supplement the standard unit on evolution with additional materials. Then someone complained. A citizens group was organized. Groups from outside the community began to lobby the school district, and the dispute became an issue in school board elections. The controversy polarized Burlington.
Most widely discussed trial of the 20s, the Darwin case, July 24, 1925.
Of course, this is not the first time evolution has divided a community. Back in the 1920s, Dayton, Tennessee prosecuted high school teacher John Scopes for teaching evolution to students in violation of state law. Remembered today as a classic battle pitting religious fundamentalists against defenders of science and academic freedom. The Scopes trial continues to affect how we view the controversy over evolution in the schools.
According to defense attorneys, was the right to teach what science had found factual.
But there is one important and unexpected difference between John Scopes and Roger DeHart. Scopes was a proponent of evolution. DeHart is not. And those who are trying to censor him from teaching too much about evolution are not religious fundamentalists. They are supporters of Darwin's theory.
Think about it's something we're dealing with in our society today in this cancel culture and censorship culture. Censorship should never ever occur in a free society. Like it's the antithesis of learning. It's the antithesis of critical thinking. People should be able to look at everything, regardless of how insane or far out or whatever it is, or even lies, and determine for themselves what is true. If somebody wants to say the earth is flat, which I don't believe, but if somebody wants to say that, they have that right. And they should be able to provide their evidence, and then I should be able to look at that evidence, look at the evidence of a globe earth, and determine for myself what I believe. The fact that people are censoring information shows that they're afraid of that information, that they don't want you to think for yourself, that they want to determine what you should and shouldn't think, that they'll decide for you. That's the opposite of freedom. That's tyranny. That's enslavement. That's propaganda. And so evolution does this in the schools constantly. They threaten schools with lawsuits. Like they're saying, they get outside organizations involved from outside the community. Anytime somebody even wants to question, like this guy, as we're going to learn here, isn't teaching creation. He's teaching students to be skeptical. He brings in scientific evidence and says, think for yourself. Does all this evidence add up? That is what thinking is about. That is what critical thinking is all about. But says the people in power, the what we would call the New World Order, the puppets of globalism and communism and socialism and all the isms, they want you thinking in a certain direction. They don't want you critically thinking. They want you just memorizing and absorbing the facts, so to speak, that they present. And so anytime something is censored, that ought to cause a red flag to go off in your head and go, wait a minute, what don't they want me to hear? What is so threatening about this information that they have to censor it? And in today's society, when you have such an evil group in control of the censorship, 9 times out of 10, whatever's being censored is true. When you look into that, you're going to find that's the real thing. That's what they don't want us to know. It's Orwellian. It's 1984. If you read that book, it's erasing facts, determining for you what facts are. So censorship is just inherently wrong. We shouldn't censor anything. And the Christian ethic, the Christian ethos is never about censorship. Truth wins. We don't have to censor the other people. We don't have to censor Islam or Hinduism or Jehovah's Witnesses. We just present the facts. We present the truth. And the truth will win. If you're a critically thinking, objective person, and because scriptures are spiritual, if the Lord gives you spiritual insight, you'll see the truth. You'll know the truth. If you look at the evolutionary creation debate from an objective, open standpoint, creationism isn't saying we need to censor evolution. We're saying we should get rid of lie. People shouldn't lie to promote their theory. But, We're not saying, hey, you can't talk about this. We're saying, go ahead, present your evidence. Our evidence will win. We have the facts. I think it was Charles Spurgeon said, you don't have to defend a lion, you just let him out of the cage. And that's what it is with truth. You don't have to defend or protect or hide truth. You just speak truth and it'll stand. You don't need to censor. So anytime there's censorship going on, like I say, it's inherently evil. There's something wicked afoot. Why are they trying to censor this guy? Why don't they want students critically thinking? It's because they know their theory is garbage, and anybody that's objectively critically thinking is going to come to that conclusion, and they can't allow that. They need their theory. They need to discredit creation. They need to discredit the Bible because they don't want God. Psalms 2 talks about that. They rage against God. They want to throw off his control. They don't want, because if there's a God, and then you have to learn, okay, well, he's the author of all things. He created us. He gets to determine the rules. And if he says don't do this, we can't do that, but we want to do that, so we better silence God. We better censor God. And that's what this is all about. It's wickedness. Censorship is just wicked. It's such a wicked society we're living in. And it's just been amped up recently where they're just censoring information. Anytime something factual is presented, like on Facebook, you get the fact checkers trying to discredit it, or they just block somebody, or shadow ban you. It's wicked.
I think American schools teach too little about evolution. I think that a lot of the information regarding evolution is taught uncritically. Does natural selection provide you with more information? They're not asking students to really examine the evidence given and to ask whether or not that's a plausible explanation. It's more or less regurgitate the facts, regurgitate what we've told you, and don't question, because if you question, that means that you must have a religious belief.
So dangerous. It's the opposite of freedom.
That must motivate your objections to evolution rather than the science.
It's the path
Caught
to
in the middle of
tyranny.
that clash and the shouting match.
The hard situation caught the awareness of the national press, setting off a frenzy of media attention.
The ACLU disagreed and filed a complaint with the school.
Separation of church and state could crumble under mounting pressure from those who want
You notice that too? This little small community, why is worldwide news picking up on it? Because the media is the propaganda tool of the system. The media is garbage. It is a lying, brainwashing program. That's why they call it a program. It's meant to program you. It's propaganda. It's repetitive nonsense. So they get the media involved, and they use repeat phrases like separation of church and state. That's not in the Constitution. Go get your Constitution and look that up. That phrase does not exist. So it's just propaganda, repetitive. They just repeat that over and over to just brainwash people. We'll get into more of that down the road about media lies. I think maybe we'll even touch a little bit on Operation Mockingbird, which I don't know too much about, but we'll get a little information. Basically, in the 50s, the CIA took control over the major broadcasting networks. I think back then there was only 3, ABC, CBS, and NBC. And basically just to make sure that the military-industrial complex, which today is our corporate, bureaucratic, fascist government, to make sure that their agenda is being reported on the news, that all other information is censored and you only get the propaganda. So you don't ever get your information from mainstream media, whether it's PBS, CBS, NBC, MSNBC, CNN, Fox, what were some radio stations, the NPR, Time magazine, the Tribunes, the journals. None of those. They're all, and we'll learn about that too. One of the things that the Illuminati, the New World Order, the people behind the scenes pulling the strings, the uber rich elite bankers. One of the things they do is they'll control industries through monopolization and consolidation. So you turn on your TV and you got 500 channels. You go and pick up a local newspaper in different cities. You got 500 newspapers. You got 500 radio stations to choose from. What they don't tell you is that through umbrella corporations, they're like MTV and VH1 and Comedy Central. You think these are different organizations, but they're all owned by the same corporation, like Viacom, and I don't know if those ones are under Viacom's umbrella or not. And then you track that, and Viacom's owned by another bigger corporation, and you track that back, and it's another bigger corporation. So you got these 1,500 different media outlets that are all controlled by like 6 major corporations. Disney, Viacom, Rupert Murdoch's organization, whatever that's called, I can't remember. But you have it's through, they consolidated, they've monopolized the industry, and then so that they can't get caught monopolizing, they create these shell organizations, these sub businesses with different names to run other sub businesses. It's a pyramid thing. So you think you're getting all these different options, but it's really the same people controlling all the information, and those 6 corporations are owned by the same Illuminati families, the same 12 families that we'll get into further down the line. But it's that way in other industries too. The oil industry, the steel industry, the coal industry, the universities, the government bureaucratic organizations like CFR, Trilateral, Bilderberg, the banking system. They're all controlled by these same people at the top, a very small cabal of wicked, devil-worshipping people. It's a satanic conspiracy. They're at the top of all the industries: music, Hollywood, media, academia, politics, banking, natural resources, food, agriculture. They're at the top of it all, these same people, when you start tracing it back. And they're all involved in the occult. They're all satanic. They're all moving all these industries in the same direction towards the New World Order. So it's a great conspiracy, but that's what's going on here. They get the media to promote their agenda, and it's very effective, as we can see in today's society. There's a very large portion of our society that has never learned anything other than what the media tells them. They've never ever critically thought. We had this window of opportunity from like 2000 to 2018 where the internet was like a free zone, because the internet came along and all of a sudden information was available everywhere. Unfortunately, a lot of people didn't do research, but a lot of people did. You got lots of people who did independent research and started figuring things out. But now the internet's coming under the control of those same umbrella corporations. Now everything's been consolidated, whereas before, you would have to www. blah 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 to go to a certain website to get your information, or to go to a message board. Now that's all been consolidated to Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. You just have these major corporations that the vast majority of internet traffic is going through, whereas before you could do like a Bing search or a Yahoo search, and you still can, but the vast majority of it has been consolidated into Google. So you have these major corporations that are being funded and organized by the same powers. That we had that window of opportunity where the internet was free, but now this web of control, World Wide Web, has taken over. So now the internet is becoming a non-free entity. It's becoming just like television media, newspaper media. It's becoming the same thing. It's getting harder and harder to find real information.
Creationism taught as science.
In the local newspaper, opponents of DeHart took out a full-page ad and filled the pages with angry letters to the editor.
Fanatics like DeHart and his cohorts will never be satisfied. The issue is whether students receive the education they're legally entitled to, free of contamination by the religious agenda of DeHart.
Mr. DeHart stands exposed as the fox in the henhouse, from which he should be ejected.
When parents discovered that their children, in their view, were not being taught science, but rather were being taught basically incorrect facts and wrong science on the basis of what they thought was Mr. DeHart's religious motivation, they had every reason to petition their Board of Education for the redress of that grievance.
Contrary to state law, Darwin's theory of evolution.
When the Scopes trial took place in 1925, you had a large part of the country where school boards would not allow Darwinian evolution to be taught. I think that's hardly true anywhere, and certainly nobody wants that to be true today. What you have is the Scopes trial turned on its head now, because you've got people who say in school boards, you can't teach any criticism of Darwin.
Often all we hear about are the creationists who are trying to stop teachers from teaching evolution. But that really is an outdated stereotype. If it ever was accurate, it certainly isn't any longer. The sort of teachers now not allowed to teach science are teachers like Roger DeHart, who are being told that they can't criticize Darwin in the classroom.
The Roger DeHart controversy is just typical of many in the country. What he's trying to do is show that there are serious, growing concerns among scientists about Darwinian evolution.
The controversy in modern times is not between science and religion, it's between two different interpretations of the same scientific evidence. It's not science versus religion, it's science versus science.
There's no controversy among scientists over whether evolution took place. I don't know anybody who argues against whether evolution took place, except for those who have religious reasons for it.
If she don't get saved, she's going to have some.
Anytime anyone criticizes Darwin's theory of evolution, evolutionists immediately cry, it's about religion.
Well, the claim that all skeptics about Darwinian orthodoxy or Christian fundamentalists stands refuted by me. It's obviously not true. I'm neither Christian nor a fundamentalist. But lots and lots of people are skeptical in the scientific community.
I became skeptical of Darwinian evolution early on, outside of any religious influence, just because of the complexity that I was learning about in the cell. And we use the word elegant in genetics. So I removed myself. In part, evolution was a powerful explanatory mechanism, but it seemed insufficient.
School officials informed DeHart that any supplemental materials he wanted to assign, even articles from mainstream science publications, now had to be submitted for approval.
I know of no other teacher who actually submitted articles to the principal for review up until my controversy.
According to DeHart, his principal rejected all his requests, and he was forbidden from using any outside materials that might be critical of evolution.
They went from not allowing me to introduce any supplemental materials, then to telling me that I could not verbally share any of this information with my students.
The fact of the matter is, every other teacher in Burlington School District was allowed to assign supplementary materials whenever they want. But when Roger DeHart decided to assign a few articles from mainstream science journals, they censored him.
One article Roger DeHart wanted to show students was from the American Biology Teacher, the leading peer-reviewed journal for secondary school biology teachers. It was written by Jonathan Wells, a biologist with a PhD in molecular and cell biology from the University of California at Berkeley. Wells is one of a growing number of scientists raising objections to Darwin's theory. In his article, Wells points out how many textbooks continue to use fraudulent drawings of embryos made by 19th century German Darwinist Ernst Haeckel.
Ernst Haeckel was a German biologist and artist, a contemporary of Darwin's, who, among other things, made some famous drawings of vertebrate embryos, fish, humans, salamanders, chicks, turtles, and so on. And in those drawings, Haeckel tried to show that all these different vertebrates look very much the same as early embryos. Their early similarities showed that they came from a common ancestor, and differences arose only later. The problem is that he faked his drawings. The early vertebrate embryos don't really look that similar at all.
The problem with Haeckel's drawings wasn't just that they were inaccurate, they were actually false in many cases. But the real damage was done when these drawings entered into biology textbooks decades ago, and they've never really been taken out. If you open a high school biology text now, or even a college biology text, you'll find these drawings, although they may not refer to them as Haeckel's drawings, and in fact, they trace their ancestry directly to Haeckel.
See the pictures of the embryos.
And it's really damaged our understanding of development and our understanding of biology in general.
It's clear that Haeckel may have fudged his drawings somewhat to look more like his ideal than they actually are. Now, does that actually take away from what we know about the relationship of embryology to evolution?
Yeah.
Not a bit.
Yeah, it does. You lied.
The
It
whole
ain't real.
Haeckel's embryo story has been greatly blown out of significance. It is a minor footnote in the history of science, and actually it's been known for 10 or 15 years that Haeckel's embryos are not to be relied upon.
Then why do
The
you keep
reason
including it in the
why
textbook?
the diagrams are reproduced is because they're easily available. There's no copyright on them. It's an easy way to illustrate a point. And
Do you see how wicked that is? Whoa, this woman makes me angry. It's, we know they're lies. Yeah, the reason we use them is because, you know, it's cheap. We need to put something in there. So we're going to intentionally lie to the children. And when you question it about us, we're going to justify it with some ridiculous, yeah, well, you know, we needed something to put on that page. It's evil. Evil. I get very, very angry at people that intentionally lie. She is a deceiver.
I would argue that the basic point that's being illustrated by those drawings is still accurate.
But if you go back earlier in development, the different classes of vertebrates look even more different.
According to Wells, Haeckel, in many modern textbooks, misleads students not just because of fake drawings, but because they leave out the earliest stages of embryonic development. What students are shown as the first stage of embryonic development is actually the mid-stage.
And very few textbooks show those earliest stages, and yet that's the whole point. It's the earliest stages that are supposed to be the most similar, and they're not. Some textbooks actually use photographs of embryos, but they pick only that stage and those classes that happen to look most similar. And they omit the earlier stages, and they omit those classes that don't look similar. So that, to me, is picking the evidence very carefully to support the theory, and that's not good science.
Wells is a critic of Darwin's theory, but even staunch evolutionists like Harvard's Stephen Jay Gould have criticized the use of diagrams based on Haeckel in textbooks.
Stephen Jay Gould wrote an article for Natural History saying that we need to let go of these drawings, that basically that they're not needed.
But when DeHart requested permission to let students read Gould's article, that request was turned down too.
Why does Mr. DeHart feel so strongly to have these articles read? Well, it's because he wants to call into question the whole issue of whether evolution happened. I don't think this is good science education for the students in that district.
You don't think it's good
And apparently
brainwashing?
neither did his colleagues nor his superintendent.
We have a science curriculum. We have a mainstream science theory called evolution. Our job is to teach the adopted curriculum, and that's what we follow.
But just how important are Haeckel's embryos? And does a single textbook mistake even matter?
If Haeckel's embryo drawings were the only problem with biology textbooks, I would agree that this is an isolated error. The problem is that it's not the only problem.
In fact, says Wells, today's textbooks are filled with outdated examples for evolution, which many evolutionary biologists no longer consider good science. In a recent book, he calls these the icons of evolution.
The icons of evolution, these are examples of textbook evidences that have taken on a life of their own. They go far beyond the truth, far beyond the facts, and have become symbols, in effect, of Darwin's theory. Symbols that actually distort the scientific evidence. In many cases, they're called icons by Darwinian biologists themselves.
A second icon of evolution, according to biologist Jonathan Wells, are finches found on the Galapagos Islands off of South America, islands Darwin visited in 1835 on the voyage of the HMS Beagle.
Another icon of evolution are some species of birds on the Galapagos Islands that are very similar except for the size and shape of their beaks. And it's thought, and it's quite possible, that they evolved from a common ancestor because of having to eat different foods on the different islands.
In 1994, journalist Jonathan Weiner published The Beak of the Finch, a book about research into the Galapagos finches. It won the Pulitzer Prize. Weiner argued that the finches represent the best and most detailed demonstration to date of the power of Darwin's process. Similar claims are made in many biology textbooks.
The Galapagos finches are a spectacular example of evolution. When the food quality, in other words, the kind of food that was available, changed as a result of a drought or a particularly rainy year or something like that, over the course of just a couple of years, they could see dramatic changes in the beak sizes in various populations. Natural selection can drive changes of a structure, like the beak, in one direction in response to selective pressure, not...
But like Hovind pointed out, beak changing, or hair color change, or big dog or small dog, is not adding new information to the DNA. Natural selection didn't say, oh, there's a drought, so we're going to add information so these birds can get bigger beaks so they can get the seeds that are buried in these husks. No, that information was already present in the DNA, and natural selection, variation, chose that part. That was the surviving bird because they had that trait to survive. But it was an already present trait in the DNA. No new information was added. No evolution occurred. Variation occurred within the species. Variation that God pre-programmed into the DNA. He pre-programmed whether we were going to be 5 foot or 6 foot or 7 foot, whether we'd have blonde hair or blue hair, or blonde hair or brown hair, or blue eyes or green eyes. The variation is already included in our DNA strand, and genetics because of your parents, or because of where you're born, or circumstances causes those dominant traits to come forth. But it's already present information. Nothing new has been created. There is no creation there. There's selection of already existing information. It is not evolution. It's foolish. And Hovind does a great job in those earlier videos of showing that.
Just fast enough to account for what would be required for Darwin's theories, but actually 50 to 100 times faster than that.
A severe drought could cause many of the finches to die and leave only those with larger beaks. So in the following generation, the average beak size was increased.
It'd be like, that's so dumb. All right, so in America, we have light-skinned people, we have dark-skinned people, we have in-between people. If a disease came along that killed all the whites, killed all the light-skinned people, so that only brown and black were available to breed, the next generation is going to be dark-skinned people. And then people go, oh, evolution has occurred. No, the variation was already present. You know, there's birds that had big beaks and small beaks. Situation occurred that caused some to die. Guess which ones lived? The ones with the traits that benefited them. That's not evolution. It's selection within already existing DNA.
And some textbooks extrapolate this over 200 years or so and say that a few of these events strung together could transform these finches into a new species by making their beaks larger.
Look, the stuff about finch beaks is certainly interesting. Let's not confuse ourselves about that.
Think about that. If okay, so there's a drought, the big-beaked birds live. They're the ones that reproduce. Their children have big beaks. How long is that going to take in order for that bird to turn into a reptile? Never. It's just big-beaked birds surviving. You know, big-nosed people survive because of some weird disease. We're never going to turn into elephants. It's just not going to happen. It's so dumb. It's a fairy tale. It's a complete misreading. They're looking at that evidence and then imagining some fantasy and teaching that to students and blocking all the evidence against it.
The question is, can it be extrapolated, or does it represent cyclic variation?
What the books fail to mention is that as soon as the rains came back, the average beak size returned to normal. There was no net evolution. What we're really seeing is just one species oscillating back and forth with no real evolutionary change. So the evidence is exaggerated to make it appear to support Darwin's theory in a way that it really doesn't.
The contrary may be true. We may be seeing the development of entirely new species. The Galapagos finch starts off as a finch, and within 100 million years there'll be a Galapagos elephant. Could be. But we need a whole lot more by way of evidence than a couple of nutty journalists going down there looking at finch beaks and writing a Pulitzer Prize-winning book. A whole lot more if this is to be serious science. I mean, this doesn't even pass the threshold of anecdote. Finch beaks change in size. Yeah, they do. They change in shape too. It seems to be correlated with seasons. There seems to be a regress back toward the mean when the seasons change again. If this is the part of a spectacular evolutionary extrapolation, let's have additional reasons for thinking that.
The changes are temporary, they oscillate back and forth, and they don't go anywhere. So, as evidence for the origin of species, Darwin's finches really don't work.
Critics of Darwin's theory say that finch beaks provide a good example of microevolution, small changes within a species or gene pool. But it does not by itself provide evidence for macroevolution, which is the origin of fundamentally new organisms and body plans.
When we look at dogs, no matter how far back we go, it's dogs. When we look at bacteria, no matter what we do, they stay bugs. They don't change in their fundamental nature. There seems to be some sort of an inherent species limitation, and we have no good explanation for this in terms of Darwin.
Yeah, we do. God said, let them produce after their kind. We do have a good explanation.
In theory, we should have far more flexibility, far more plasticity under laboratory conditions than we actually do if Darwinian theory or anything like that were correct.
According to critics of Darwin's theory, the problems facing macroevolution can be clearly seen in yet a third icon of evolution, the four-winged fruit fly.
In opening a biology text, one will often see a picture of a four-winged fruit fly. Now, as we know, ordinary fruit flies have only two wings. The four-winged fruit fly has not only its regular set of wings, but a second set of wings just next to that. And the caption or the text will say, this is evidence for the process of evolution, that mutations affect the process of development, and you can get anomalies as interesting as a four-winged fruit fly. Well, it turns out that the four-winged fruit fly is actually a very poor example of Darwinian evolution, certainly.
There are no muscles attached to it, so the second set of wings is effectively dead. The fly is a hopeless cripple. It's kind of like having a small plane with an extra pair of wings tied to its tail. The fly can only survive in the laboratory, and it would be selected out by natural selection in the wild. So it's not a step forward in evolution. It's an evolutionary dead end.
Modern Darwinian theory, known as neo-Darwinism, is based on the idea that randomly occurring mutations in genes provide the raw material needed for evolution to work.
The idea that mutations are considered the engines of evolution has only one problem: there's no evidence to support it.
So if you think about changes in the genetic code, can you think of any changes that would be beneficial or helpful to organisms?
Almost all mutations are deleterious. Almost all of them do the organism absolutely no good. In fact, we have a devilishly hard time finding any mutations that do the organism any good whatsoever.
These organisms only really survive in the laboratory. No other fruit fly will mate with them. These are not promising avenues for macroevolution. They're in fact dead ends for evolution because these mutations cannot be passed on by ordinary reproduction. It's almost as if the fruit fly says, if you want me to exist at all, I better have 2 eyes, 6 legs, 2 wings, and so on. I better have more or less the normal form.
Modern Darwinists contend that there are some cases where mutations do promote evolution. Their chief example could be considered another icon of evolution: antibiotic-resistant bacteria.
Antibiotic resistance, in terms of natural selection, is an excellent example. And its use, I mean, it's one of the hallmark examples given in microevolution for support of Darwinian thought. However, I think in the last few years, it's got to be reinterpreted to a degree.
Laboratory research shows that when an antibiotic is applied to literally billions of bacteria cells in a petri dish, a few mutated cells that happen to be resistant to that drug remain. Those few cells can then give rise to a colony of resistant bacteria. The question is, how well does this mutant strain survive in the long run? This can be measured in what scientists call fitness cost. How well does this mutant bacteria survive when the drug is removed and it now must compete with the original parent bacteria?
These organisms are not able to grow with the fidelity, the robustness that the original parent did, and that's one of the things that we've been looking at. So you can take a culture of cells that are sensitive to the drug, plate them out on petri dishes that have the drug, but there's a single colony coming up that's resistant to the drug. One cell that gave rise to this colony was resistant to the drug out of 4 billion. If this is the parental strain, we now have a mutant, we grow them up separately, and then we put them in the same test tube without the drug. So now we've removed selection, and we can measure empirically the fitness cost in terms of how well the resistant organism can now compete with its parent.
The surprising result is that in a relatively short period of time, the resistant bacteria lose out in their competition with the parent. They can't reproduce as fast, and over a short time disappear.
Within 1 or 2 transfers of overnights, you can lose that population of resistant cells, and then after the 3rd transfer, the resistant isolate has been completely outcompeted by the parent. It turns out that the resistant strain has a defect in its information processing system. The cell's crippled, and there's a limit to how much change can occur. When the resistant strain comes into contact with a parental wild type in nature, the parental wild type will reestablish dominance in the population, resulting in no net evolutionary change. We're going backwards in terms of the fitness of these organisms, not forwards, is used as an example of evolution.
I wish they'd provide like a good analogy there. Sometimes the information's like complex and it's all kind of jumbled in my head, and like I kind of understand it, but I need like a good word picture, you know, a good example. Like I'm trying to think of one that would like, what's a mutated human? Like albino, I suppose. So imagine under forced circumstances that only albinos were allowed to breed. So they're going to keep producing albinos. But now you take away the force and just allow natural cohabitation to take place. I would assume a lot of people aren't attracted to albinos or attracted to, you know, whatever they're attracted to. So you reintroduce albinos into a regular society. Regular society is going to choose to breed with regular society on a greater number than with albino, and so the albino population is going to dwindle again, and you're going to have regular. So it's only under those forced circumstances, which is the opposite of evolution, because that requires a laboratory, that requires intelligence, that requires intelligent forces causing the change. I think that makes sense, right? Is that a good analogy? I think that makes sense. I don't know, it makes sense to me. I'm not a scientist, but...
According to critics of Darwin's theory, finch beaks, four-winged fruit flies, and drug-resistant bacteria all raise problems for the neo-Darwinian claim that random mutations and natural selection drive the development of life. But there's another part of Darwin's theory that is also being challenged by some scientists. That's the claim that all...
I suppose right there, right? That's about the halfway point. Yeah, we'll stop there. It's a good spot. All right, so we're halfway through this documentary. We'll do one more on this, and then we're going to move on to God of Wonders, I believe. and then creatures that defy evolution. So I think there's between those there's 4 discs. I don't know how long each one is, but these ones have been looking at kind of the last 2, Unlocking the Mysteries and Icons, have been looking at the wisdom of God, and how and then this one here is looking at the foolishness of evolution, and how the only evidences they have are lies, are forced evidences that they have to censor and what's the word, propagandize, is that a word? They have to intentionally mislead students in order to get them to adhere to this stuff. But in the next part of this because we're still going to be looking at the evolutionary theory here for the next several videos. But the next part, we're going to see God's creativity and beauty as we look at some of the things that he's created. So you have his wisdom, his creativity, his beauty, all, and his power, just showing just the magnificence of our Creator and what he's done. So those videos will be fun. I think they're more on the kind of a National Geographic nature type, where we're going to be looking at animals and insects and flowers and just looking at the creativity and the beauty of these things. But this Icons of Evolution, man, sometimes, when you hear people intentionally deceiving and misleading people, that just makes me angry. Like on a religious part, like when a false teacher, that gets me fired up, or politicians or a media personality lying to people, deceiving people, that gets me fired up. These teachers, because they're in positions of authority, and we have just a mass of population. The Lord called us sheep. We follow leaders. You have a massive population that looks to authority figures. One of the popular things amongst the brainwashed now is believe the science, follow the science. And they're being lied to. They believe authority figures. So when you see an authority figure, a person in a position of power, intentionally lying and deceiving and misleading, that's so wicked, because they know that they're lying and deceiving. You look at the masses and it's like, okay, they're just, they're brainwashed, they're misled, they're deceived, they're blind. But then you look at the leaders and you go, these people see, and they're intentionally misleading these people. They're intentionally deceiving them, leading them into the ditch. That just makes me angry. So, anyways, yeah, that was good. A lot of good information. And Hovind touched on all these. He pointed out, I don't think he got into the drug-resistant bacteria, but the other 3 icons that were mentioned there, the fruit flies, what were the other ones? The Darwin finches, and what was the first one? Why am I forgetting the first one? It was Darwin's finches, the fruit flies, the drug-resistant bacteria, and drawing a blank. We just watched it. I forgot. But anyways, Hovind touched on those and did a great job of just real succinctly providing bullet point evidences against them. This is going more into detail, and you're getting like scientific explanations from people who are trained in these fields. So it's good. Your heart goes out to these people. I don't know if a lot of these scientists are born again. They're just being intellectually honest and looking at the evidence and following it where it leads. So you would hope that they would keep doing that, because they'll come to realize there's a creator, and then if they have the courage given by the Holy Spirit, if they're led to seek out that creator, they're gonna find the Lord. So you want these people to get saved. Like I like that Jonathan Wells guy. Yeah, that's what I got for you guys. As always, I really appreciate you watching. I love you, and Lord willing, we'll talk to you next time.